Hello, plant friends. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Darylyn, and today we are talking about one of the absolute most it plants in the plant and arid collecting community right now, Philodendron Lynamii. Now, if you are a regular viewer of this channel, you will know that I have not one, but two of these amazing plants in my personal collection. One of them is actually right here, as a matter of fact. And we are so lucky today, everybody, because we have caught this girl on the exact day that her brand new leaf has unfurled. Take a second to check that out. That is incredibly gorgeous. These plants are really known for the fact that their brand new foliage comes out this color. Some people describe it as like a pink color. I think it looks like strawberry Laffy Taffy, but no matter what it reminds you of, the plant is undeniably gorgeous, and this new growth is definitely something to see. Up until recently, they were extremely rare. I'm talking like second only to what the Philodendron Spiritus Sancti used to be before it started being tissue cultured. So rare, you could not find them anywhere. So, why have I brought you here today? What does the title of this video mean? Well, that is kind of a long story, so strap in, plant nerds, because you're about to get schooled on some botanical history. But before we get into the video, first I would like to thank a couple of people who really helped me out in making it. First of all, I'd like to thank David Arguelles, the author of an absolutely top-notch article that was posted in the International Aroid Society Facebook group about Philodendron Lynamii and its history, how it came to get that name, and some other really interesting things we're going to talk about in a second. If you like this video and want to learn more about this amazing plant, I highly recommend that you check that out. I will link the article in the Facebook page in the description box below. Also, please head over to David's Instagram account. His account is at Andre Plants. Secondly, I'd also like to thank NSE Tropicals for giving me permission to use some of their photos as well. All right, plant friends, one last thing. Don't forget to give this video a like and then also subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. Additionally, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to chat with you. All right, now, without further ado, let's get into, is Philodendron Lynamii an imposter? Now, the story of this plant as we know it today, Philodendron Lynamii, starts back in the mid-1980s. In 1984, Dr. Tom Croat, one of the preeminent aroid botanists in the field, collected a specimen of what would eventually become to be known as Philodendron Lynamii on a collection trip to Peru. Upon returning back to the States, he set about trying to identify the plant and verify whether or not it was a new discovery. And he thought that he had a match between his plant he had collected and a plant that was in the private collection of a prominent arid collector named Ralph Lynam. So this was going on in the mid-1980s. It took until 1997, over 10 years later, before the plant bloomed. And then Dr. Croat and Ralph Lynam were able to confirm that it was indeed the same plant. It's very common for aroids and other plants like that to be identifiable or distinguishable from other similar ones only by their blooms. And so when the plant bloomed, they made the determination that they were very likely to be the same plant. And Dr. Croat named the plant Philodendron Lynamii after Ralph Lynam, since he had had the plant in his collection prior to Dr. Croat collecting it from the wild. Now, I know what you may be thinking, well, that sounds like pretty straightforward. It was collected from the wild. It was named after the dude that already had it in his collection. Like, that makes sense. Like, I don't really understand what, like, the mystery is here. And you didn't explain to me, like, how that makes the plant not real. Clearly, you're still holding it. Well, that is where things get very interesting for our friend, the Philodendron Lynamii. What if I told you that this plant was not discovered and collected for the first time in the 1980s, but actually was probably collected for the first time all the way back in 1894, almost 100 years before Dr. Croat matched his specimen to the one that Ralph Lynam was keeping in his collection? Well, that appears to be what happened. evidence has recently come to light that the Philodendron Lynamii may not have been discovered by Ralph Lynam and Dr. Crote in the mid-20th century, but rather was indeed collected for the first time from the wilds of Peru way back at the end of the 19th century by a botanist with the Ghent Horticultural Society by the name of Lucian Linden. His description was included in an 1895 issue of the Horticultural Illustration, and it described a plant that was incredibly close in appearance and in growth habit to what we know today as Philodendron Lynamii. And this description was also accompanied by a lithograph that is a gorgeous piece of artwork in and of itself, but also that captures a plant that looks remarkably similar to this gorgeous Lynamii that I have here today. In addition to the signature perfect heart-shaped glossy leaves with the attractive ribbing, the lithograph also captures the bright reddish and pinkish hues of the new growth, including the redness of the entire petiole of the emerging leaves. Lucian Linden, who discovered and described the plant, named it Philodendron Devansayeanum, which is kind of a mouthful, but it was named after his close friend and collaborator, Alphonse de la Devansaye. And it looks like after the introduction of Philodendron Devansayeanum to the European horticultural scene, it appears that the plant was cultivated in various locations across Western Europe, including in Germany and the Netherlands, in addition to Belgium, where the original specimen was brought after its collection from the wild. Unfortunately, and this may be one of the reasons why Philodendron Lynamii is considered so exceedingly rare, and also why the name Devansayeanum was essentially lost to history for so long, was that Lucian Linden's original description of the plant seems to have been lost somewhere along the way. Actually, in David's article, it just said in the wars. Which is pretty funny if you think about it, because actually, yeah, there were a lot of wars in Europe between 1895 and 1984. I can think of two pretty significant ones off the top of my head. I think that for those of us who are Americans and grew up in the United States, we don't always really realize the rampant devastation that happened in Europe during World War I and World War II. And it's thought that during this time, not only were the records that included the description of the plant, the name Devansayeanum, and whatnot, but also then many of the specimens that were kept throughout Europe were destroyed, or perhaps they were abandoned when people were evacuating and whatnot. And by the 1960s, it's thought that there was potentially only one private collector still cultivating specimens from the original collection by Lucian Linden, and that's because a specimen of Philodendron Devansayeanum did reemerge in the mid-1960s when it was gifted to the National Botanical Garden of Belgium by the descendants of one of the largest commercial dealers of the plant from back around the time when Lucian Linden described and collected the original plant. And these were the Van Hout sons, and even though they were considered rivals of Lucian Linden and the namesake of the plant, Alphonse de la Devansaye, they were frequent collaborators of the Ghent Horticultural Society, where the plant's original specimen was taken, and that's probably how they got their hands on the plant in the first place. But yeah, isn't that absolutely just crazy to think that this, like, the sources say that after the plant was described in the late 1800s, it was cultivated commercially widely throughout Europe, and then all of those specimens were lost or no longer accounted for after the wars. That's absolutely mind-blowing. You know, it's really funny to think about how history doesn't just happen in a vacuum, and the ramifications of historical events really spread far and wide, and little areas where you don't really think about these types of things running through them, you know, they're really affected by it. This plant that we're all extremely excited about and are trying to get our hands on right now, this Philodendron Devansayeanum, aka Lynamii, was essentially reduced down to a couple of specimens over in Europe where it was originally being cultivated because of human bullshit and garbage. So yeah, that's a nice thought, but fascinating nonetheless. So this is really interesting. But what does it have to do with Philodendron Lynamii not being real or being an imposter? Well, I will tell you. And this is where science comes in to ruin everything, as science tends to do. But hey, you know what? That's okay. We appreciate it nonetheless. The convention in science when it comes to naming new discoveries is that whoever gets there first gets to name it. So that sounds pretty standard, right? Like, you know, of course, if you discover something first, you should get to name it. However, what actually ends up happening kind of frequently in the scientific community, things that have already been discovered are oftentimes rediscovered and then given new names. And then the new name of the more recent discovery becomes the more known name. And then come to find out it had already been named. And then people get really irritated about having to change the name of something that has become a beloved icon to them. Perhaps one of the best examples of this would be the Brontosaurus. The Brontosaurus, a much beloved icon of many a childhood, actually was determined to not be a separate species sometime after it was discovered and described. It was determined that it was actually just another specimen of a dinosaur that had already been named Apatosaurus. Now, I don't want to get too far into this because this channel is not about dinosaurs, but my guess is that most of my viewers at home have heard of a Brontosaurus. And they've actually gone back and forth on this a lot over whether Brontosaurus is a different species than Apatosaurus. And like, I don't really remember where that debate ever did settle or if it ever did settle. However, the same thing could be about to happen to Philodendron Lynamii, because even though technically Philodendron Lynamii is still unofficially described, it seems very likely, based on the original drawings, the original descriptions, and the specimens in Europe, that this Philodendron Lynamii plant that Dr. Croat collected in the 80s and that was named after Ralph Lynam was discovered in 1895 and given a name after some Belgian guy. And once that's officially resolved, there's not going to be officially a Philodendron Lynamii anymore. It's going to be called Devansayeanum. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but to me, I feel like there's a certain magic about the names of certain plants that give them this kind of like aura and mystique that really, really entices people to want them. And I just feel like, would this plant be as sought after if it was called Devansayeanum all along? You know, Lynamii just has this kind of like alluring ring to it. It's kind of the same thing with like Philodendron Birkin. You know, that plant was tissue cultured and given a name that already had a certain connotation with the intention of trying to get people to go crazy for it and buy it. Same thing with the Spiritus Sancti. Like, the name Spiritus Sancti, I mean, that evokes this level of like holiness and mystery and sanctity about it that I wonder if the plant was called something else, if people would be as interested in it. Monstera Obliqua is another good one, you know, the oblique, the hidden, the obscured. And funny story about that, Mick Mittermeier, who is one of kind of the foremost amateur experts on Monstera Obliqua, on his YouTube channel, he did a video a couple years ago where he said that the first plant that was called Obliqua wasn't actually the spindly, lacy Obliqua Peru that is so iconic. And it looks like the iconic plant that we know as Obliqua may not actually be closely enough related to the original Obliqua for it to actually necessitate being called Obliqua. Could you imagine that? Monstera Obliqua being called something else? It's pretty nuts. So I wonder truly how the name change on some of these plants is going to affect their desirability, because for whatever reason, I just find Lynamii to be a little bit more of an alluring name, but it really shouldn't matter and it shouldn't change how interesting the plant is, because the plant is the plant at the end of the day, no matter what. Now, I wouldn't like go around correcting people that call it Lynamii, because at this point, you know, that's what everyone knows that it is. And technically the plant hasn't been like officially cataloged, and so it doesn't technically have an official name. And then even more so, there's so many plants out there where their commercial names are different from their scientific name, you know, like the Monstera deliciosa is sometimes sold as a split-leaf philodendron, and that's not right. You know, we have Thematophyllums being sold as philodendrons. We have a million Adansonii variations being sold as obliqua and whatnot. So the commercial plant market is probably not gonna change the name of a plant that has started being marketed anytime soon. And I'm probably gonna still call it Philodendron Lynamii as well, or maybe just, you know, in parentheses, the correct name. But I just think that the history of botany and the history of plant collecting is so incredibly fascinating. So that's the tea on that. Philodendron Lynamii may be an imposter, it may not really exist, but either way, Philodendron Devansayeanum / Lynamii is an incredible plant. It's absolutely deserving of the moment that it is having right now. They are so beautiful, super easy plants. They have the most beautiful, perfect heart-shaped leaves that I think I've seen on any philodendron. And I am just so excited that I got a chance to show everyone the absolutely gorgeous, stunning, mythical, brand new Lynamii foliage the day that it unfurled. So I'm not gonna lie, like I was specifically waiting to film this video until the day that this leaf unfurled because I wanted to share it with everybody because I just think it's like such a cool thing to see. Should I grab my other one? Here they are, both together. This one doesn't have any new growth on it right now, but that caterpillar is definitely bigger than when I brought her home. So we should have another leaf soon. I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on that on my Instagram. But yeah, I hope you guys thought that this was really interesting. Once again, don't forget to pop over to David's Instagram at Andres Plants and check out the International Airways Society Facebook page. If you haven't given NSE Tropicals a follow yet, like I don't know what you're doing, but go ahead and do that too. I really appreciate that, you know, both David and NSE allowed me to use their materials. So that is gonna be it for today. I will leave it there. And if you guys want more Lynamii content, like maybe care guide or how to import them or whatever, please let me know in the comments below. I am happy to, you know, provide anything that at least I can to the best of my ability for you. So, all right, everybody, have a good one.